Chapter 9. The Prophet, Seer, and Revelator. Perhaps it may make some of you stumble, were I to ask you a question: does a man being a prophet in this church prove that he shall be the president of it? I answer, no. A man may be a prophet, seer, and revelator, and it may have nothing to do with his being the president of the church. Brigham Young, J.D. 1-333. No one ever knew Bishop Coyle for very long until they had to acknowledge that he was guided by some form of mystical or spiritual power. God or the devil had a hand in that man's venture, for it was never conducted in the manner of any other business project. He dug into that mountain as a poor man and died a poor man, but his spirituality is equaled by few men in the history of the church. Work progressed according to the inspired direction of Bishop Coyle, who would reveal formations in the mind before they were reached. He would also predict the future in other areas separate from the mind. The miners were always excited and somewhat surprised to witness the fulfillment of John's predictions. They enjoyed telling stories of how his remarkable gift was employed. Visitors by the thousands came to the mine to see these numerous signposts that had been predicted, and also to visit with this unusual prophet of the mine. The workmen lived and labored in a seemingly sacred project. To witness divine intervention into their daily labors was almost as though they labored on a sacred temple of the Lord. There was no swearing, no smoking or drinking on that hill, neither were there any ill feelings, stealing or other wicked practices. Contrary to most mining camps, the spirit and influence that prevailed from the beginning was such that it admittedly improved the workers in their way of life both physically and spiritually, and instead of diminishing enthusiasm, as is so often the case with a mining project, the number of workers increased, as did also those who believed this most unusual story to be true. Here at this mountain camp these men learned to pray together and to cast off whatever bad habits they had, and led much better lives than before. The Dream Mine Story, Pierce, page 13. Usually the men of the mountain were filled with the Spirit of the Lord, so much that their favorite topic was the gospel of Jesus Christ. From my own experience there, I have never witnessed anything before or since that equaled the spirituality that prevailed among the men connected with that mine. The Desert News, Zion's Bank, KSL, nor any other church-owned business, does not call their workers together to kneel down for prayer before engaging in the day's labors, which was a daily practice at the mine. What else can one say when such an influence prevails with such a project? Are we not commanded to judge a tree by its fruits? When an atmosphere is so wholesome and desirable, it is easy to conclude that the mine is of God, and that John Coyle was a prophet. It seemed ridiculous for the miners to drill and cut out a ditch for water, when there was no trace of water in the mountain. However, this is what the bishop ordered them to do. By giving them the size and dimension of the ditch, he predicted the water would just fill it. It was a nuisance to make, but they dug it anyway. One morning as they neared the 2,200-foot mark, Bishop Coyle addressed the miners at the breakfast table, and directed his remarks to his nephew, who also bore the same name. John, watch the breast hole that you put in the face this morning. When you get your hole in 14 inches, you'll strike the water we've been waiting for. His nephew watched the hole ever so carefully, and kept a running measurement of it. At 13 inches he was still spooning dry dirt out of it. But at 14 inches a stream of water burst forth from it like the flow that would come out of a garden hose under pressure, and with a shout the nephew invited the other miners to come and get a good drink of it. When that round of holes was shot off, the workmen had to put on fireman helmets and raincoats, and put up a tin sheet overhead for protection from the rapid flow of water, as it came in, and began to fill the dry ditch they had waiting for it. And after the ditch was soaked good, the water began to flow out of the tunnel and down over the dump, even as it does today, filling a 3-inch pipe to full pressure capacity. The Dream Mine Story, Pierce, page 34. Claude F. Waite related an experience he witnessed of the bishop's gift of predicting. After Christmas, when we came back to the mine, Bishop had a dream wherein he saw that you would see the face of the drift or the bottom of the hole, by getting all the water out of it by Saturday 12 o'clock noon. During this interval we broke the head out of the pump. The head was 6 inches in diameter and 5/8 of an inch thick. This completely stopped our work. This occurred in the middle of the night. Lars Olsen asked me to go out and report to the bishop, who was sleeping in the cabin. The bishop told me to take a 5-gallon can and cut a piece of candle box a 1/2 inch thick, and make a head with that. This seemed ridiculous to me to even consider it. A 5/8 inch solid cast iron would not stand the pressure, a piece of tin and a 1/2 inch of soft wood would never hold it. I went back down the mine and told Lars Olsen. Lars came back up out of the mine and got the material and a little piece of strap iron to put across, and we made a new head out of that and put it on. Bishop came down the mine just as I was screwing on the last nut. Suffice it to say, this improvised head did hold the pressure, and we pumped with that tin head for several weeks, until we obtained a new one. This is a mystery that has never been explained. The head never did give out. At this time Lars said to the bishop that this is one dream that would not come true. You will not see the face of the drift Saturday noon. Coyle could not see how it would be possible either, as we had 3 days and nights of filling up with water while we were off for Christmas, and all that ran in during the time that we were pumping, but suffice it to say we did see the face by Saturday noon exactly at 12 o'clock. Story of the Dream Mine, C.F. Waite, page 14. The longer the mine was worked, the more interest and fame came to it. The curious as well as believers came to hear the stories and see the signposts in the mine. Picture the meeting house where people gathered on Thursday nights for stockholders' meetings. For instance, he predicted there would be a hogsback at a certain distance in the tunnel, and it was found. Again, he predicted there would be a strange dark-shaped formation that resembled North America. When they reached the specified spot, there was the map of America on the wall. It can be seen there to this day, about 750 feet inside the portal of the horizontal tunnel. Bishop Coyle told the workmen that certain right turns to veins would follow their course, and they came along just as he predicted. At times the workmen were told that slip faults would make perfect walls running to the north or to the south, etc. They always appeared on schedule. Other interesting formations were also described by him before they were found. Near the 1,300-foot mark a red iron formation was encountered, and 20 feet southward was a large white vein. At nearly 2,000 feet an odd-shaped vein 2 inches on one side and 18 inches on the other was found, which was the mark to make the side drift into the elbow, with his 5 fingers. One day the bishop was told by the workmen that a pipe in the mill had become so worn that it must be replaced. The bishop turned to Dean Dallin and asked him where they might find one to replace it. Dean said they would probably have to go to Salt Lake City or maybe to some oil drilling outfit. The bishop wanted to go immediately to get it, so Dean took him in his car and they started down the hill. When they arrived at the highway, Dean was told to stop. After waiting and meditating for several minutes, the bishop said, "Let's go." "Which way?" "To the right." Then as they drove for a short time in the direction of Salt Lake, the bishop said, "I want to go west." They came to a turnoff, turned west, and soon came to the old sugar plant. Dean noticed that a lot of pipe had been taken out of the building and was laying on the ground. They stopped and asked the caretaker if they could buy one, and he agreed. Dean saw one that looked about the right size, but in their haste that morning, they had forgotten to take any measurements. So he picked up an extra 4-foot piece, in case they needed it for length. The bishop, however, told him they wouldn't need it. The elbow at the end of the new pipe had a peculiar angle of about 30 degrees. But by a strange coincidence, it just fit into their ore bin. The pipe was just the right size and diameter, too, as well as just the right length, not a half-inch too long or short. One of the most impressive predictions, and perhaps the most overlooked, was that money and men would always come to the mine when they were needed. And so they did from 1914 to the day the bishop died. This was a most remarkable prediction considering wars, depressions, inflation, and the constant barrage of ridicule and persecution brought against that work. From our investigation we find that it takes about $150 a week in cash for the men, and almost $50 for powder, caps, fuse, food and other supplies. Brother Coyle has been asked time and time again where all this comes from, and his only reply is, "I was told that it would come. If one person does not send, then another does. It always arrives as we need it." This is another testimony that I am right, for 2 messengers, coming into my room on the morning of January 10, 1914, told me "WHEN, you open this mine up again, we will come to your aid with men and money. They have never failed us yet." This he has observed, depending wholly upon the weekly arrival of funds, for I am told that at no time does he have any surplus, barely sufficient to skim through. This fact alone cannot be explained by our group. If you can see where his money comes from during these difficult and distressing days, you can do better than I can. We might account for some of it, but certainly not for the sums used week upon week, month upon month, and year after year. It is peculiar, all right. Statement made by Carter E. Grant, September 9, 1931, to James E. Talmage, page 5. The bishop could foretell formations within the mine before the workmen arrived there, and he could also foresee events in the world, the nation, and the church, or even in his own backyard. Coyle is a man given to predictions, and the number of things he has predicted that came to pass is astounding. One of his more outlandish predictions came years ago when, pointing across the sagebrush desert to a desolate spot, he said, "There'll be a big manufacturing plant right there someday. The place is isolated, on rocky ground, above the irrigation level, far from human habitation." 2. The valley had hundreds of better sites. Came the war, and today a powder mill stands on the spot. Isolation is a prime requisite for a powder mill, and location is ideal. Time in the Dream Mine. Samuel W. Taylor, Esquire Magazine, November 1943. One Thursday night, just a few days before Christmas in 1943, 8 men came down to the mine earlier than usual, so they could visit with the bishop before the meeting began. When time for the meeting arrived, the bishop said, "We might as well get started, this is all that will be here." The others looked out the window and saw a string of car lights heading up towards the mine. They called this to the bishop's attention, but he still maintained that there would be no more arrive for the meeting. The meeting commenced, and no one else came. Afterward, they bid goodbye to the bishop and started down the hill. They saw the reason that no one came to the meeting. The wind had blown big snow drifts over the road. A snowplow was just clearing the road, but the cars had previously turned back, since it would have been too late to get to the meeting. Once the bishop pointed to the top of the mountains and said that the day would come when a light would be seen up there. A few years after the bishop's death, the telephone company came to the officials of the mine for permission to share the use of their dugway, so that a tower could be placed atop the mountain for a coast-to-coast dial system. When the tower was completed, a large beacon light was placed on top, which could be seen from anywhere in the valley. The bishop once prophesied that there would be a drought come to the Intermountain region. Then one day in May of 1938, after many continuous days of raining, the miners were kidding the bishop not to worry about a famine or drought, but rather consider building an ark if the rains continued any longer. The bishop listened to their joking and then replied that the rains would stop the next day, and the drought would begin. Sure enough, the rains stopped on May the 18th, and no moisture came until October. And, for the next few years the drought continued. The bishop was shown some of the future home building programs that would develop throughout the country. He said houses would be patterned much the same as their chicken coops. They would have a flat roof with a large window in the front, yet they would cost so much that the people would wonder if they could ever be able to pay for them. Shortly after World War II, new housing developments began to boom around the country, with many of the houses being built just like chicken coops. The style is still current, and so are the heavy mortgages. The bishop often described the gold ore that would be found in the mine. He also described in prophecy how this ore would be reached. Carter Grant Road. Brother Coyle stated that as they would proceed down on this wall at the turn down leading westerly, they would encounter a formation so soft that it would be spaded in places, and that it would be necessary, unless care was used, to square set the shaft down to the capstone, about 90 or 100 feet below tunnel level. This capstone would be flat and about 3 feet in thickness and exceedingly hard. Upon going through the stone, they will run immediately into a white quartz or at least a white formation resembling quartz, and that this white formation will be so rich in gold that the gold will be visible in leaf-like formations. Then this light-colored or white formation carrying gold will dip to the northeast and run for about 150 feet, dipping about 80 degrees to the northeast, and then will swing under to a southeasterly direction, still carrying the same rich ore as had been encountered on the way down. Brother Coyle stated that he plainly saw his mine cart tracks and the cars running on them taking out this rich gold ore, and saw it being hoisted to tunnel level, and taken out through the straight tunnel where he saw a town grown on the outside. Grant Talmadge Statement, 1931. Page 1, the bishop explained that a beautiful city would grow at the base of the mountain, after the mine came in. Nearly all of the people of the city would be stockholders, or at least believe in the mission of the mine. So many of the buildings would be painted white, that it would be called White City. When the author went to work at the mine, he met an elderly gentleman named Salisbury, who had been a barber in California before being employed at the mine. He told me that while they were living in California, he came home one day after work and lay down on the living room couch to rest. His wife asked him if he would like to go with her to the store, but he declined by saying he would rather just rest for a while. After she left, he was looking over towards the wall when suddenly it began to vanish, but a vision of a beautiful valley came into view. He saw mountains in the background and a large lake nearby. He was high in the air looking down, and there below him was a beautiful city in which almost every building was painted white. He looked upon the scene with awe and wonderment, when suddenly the picture began to fade away and the wall came back into view. He was puzzled as to what it was, what it meant, and where the valley was. For over a year he marveled at the beautiful scene that he had beheld in vision. Then one day he went to Utah to visit some relatives who lived in Provo. During the visit they mentioned the dream mine, and how spiritual the bishop was. They all agreed that it would be a very interesting visit to go up to the mine to see it. Salisbury went into the tunnel on their little guided tour and was utterly fascinated. Finally, on his exit from the main tunnel, he beheld mountains, the lake, and the beautiful valley below it was just as he had seen it in his vision, except there was no city below the hill. He hurried down to the house where the bishop was, and asked him what had happened to all the buildings that were supposed to be there. The bishop told him that he had seen the city that would someday be built there. White City would become one of many cities to spring up in the valleys of the Rocky Mountains. It would be designated along with others, as a place of refuge, a place of safety and peace from the scourges that would overtake the fallen nations of the world. This beautiful White City, together with a number of other beautiful cities, were to be rapidly built at this time, and would serve as holy places of refuge, where the more righteous of the LDS could be gathered out for safety, as in the parable of the wheat, and the tares of people who would be determined to accept a great reformation that would be offered to them at this time. And they would dedicate themselves to living the gospel of Jesus Christ in all its fullness with nothing left out. There would be radio and TV stations, power plants and airports arise in these ultramodern cities, and they would be stocked with food and equipped with essential industries that would enable them to survive the years of famine and distress. Will the Lord purge the earth in preparation for his millennial reign? Here the very elect of the earth would prepare themselves to pioneer the new age with a new society that would replace the fallen Babylon. The Dream Mine Story, Pierce, page 64. Many times the bishop would tell the workmen what they were going to discover as they blasted out the tunnels. One morning he said, "John, you're going to find a white face in your tunnel." And within a short time a white substance would show up only to disappear after a day or two. One day he said, "Anton, it is going to rain in your tunnel." To his amazement, the dynamite that day blasted out a water seepage, making it appear to be raining in the tunnel. One morning we walked down to meet with the bishop and to have our prayer before starting our daily work. We were surprised to learn that he was planning to go into the mine himself that day. He wanted to see the face of the tunnels where we were working. He walked up to the mouth of the main tunnel, and I put him into one of the ore cars, and then pushed him all the way to the 5 fingers. When we arrived at the middle finger where I had been working every day, the bishop got out of the ore car and walked to within 15 or 20 feet of the face of the tunnel. I started to tell him how I was drilling, but he interrupted me by putting out his hand and gently pushing me back. In silence he stood looking at the rock. After about 2 minutes, he turned to me and said, "Keep going straight until you see a wall that will take you off towards the left. Follow that wall, until it leads you into another wall that will angle back to the right again. Follow that wall for a while and tell me when you get there." He turned and walked away to one of the other tunnels. At this time I was a young man with 20/20 eyesight, but the bishop was an old man with cataracts over his eyes. I walked up to within a few inches of the face of that tunnel, and could see no indications of any wall. I dynamited rock out of there for several days without any sign of a wall. Then one day I saw the beginning of a wall that leaned off to the left. It was bigger each day and continued to lead off to the left. Then one morning I discovered the beginning of another wall that led slightly back again to the right, just as the bishop had said it would. Such a remarkable occurrence made such a deep impression on me that I have never forgotten it. I realized the bishop certainly knew where he was going and what was in that mountain. I have never witnessed such a spiritual and prophetic gift by anyone, even to this day. One of the sections of the Doctrine and Covenants had never made much sense to me, nor was it ever literally fulfilled. However, the interpretation was revealed to Bishop Coyle. The bishop was reading the Doctrine and Covenants one morning, and at 10 o'clock he thought, "It's time to go into the mine and see what has showed up." He put the book on a shelf, took his lamp and walked up the trail toward the mine. He heard a voice say, "Go back and read section 111, it pertains to this place." He stopped, looked all around, but could see no one, so he started walking again. 3 times this was repeated, so he went back and read it. Relief Mine Story, J. Young, page 3. Instead of that passage of scripture referring to the city of Salem in Massachusetts, it could only be applicable to Salem, Utah. The inference of the more ancient inhabitants, v9, would be the Nephite nation who had once lived and labored in and around where Salem, Utah, is now situated. Salem, Utah, was named by people from Salem, Massachusetts, as recorded in History of Salem, Utah by Hanks. The following revelation, D&C 111, was given to Joseph Smith at Salem, Massachusetts, August 6, 1836, having traveled there from Kirtland, Ohio. 1. I, the Lord your God, am not displeased with your coming this journey, notwithstanding your follies. 2. I have much treasure in this city for you, for the benefit of Zion, and many people in this city, whom I will gather out in due time for the benefit of Zion, through your instrumentality. 3. Therefore, it is expedient that you should form acquaintance with men in this city, as you shall be led, and as it shall be given you. 4. And it shall come to pass in due time that I will give this city into your hands, that you shall have power over it, insomuch that they shall not discover your secret parts, and its wealth pertaining to gold and silver shall be yours. 5. Concern not yourselves about your debts, for I will give you power to pay them. 6. Concern not yourselves about Zion, for I will deal mercifully with her. 7. Tarry in this place, and in the regions round about. 8. And the place where it is my will that you should tarry, for the main, shall be signalized unto you by the peace and power of my Spirit, that shall flow unto you. 9. This place you may obtain by hire. And inquire diligently concerning the more ancient inhabitants and founders of this city. 10. For there are more treasures than one for you in this city. 11. Therefore ye as wise as serpents and yet without sin, and I will order all things for your good, as fast as ye are able to receive them. Amen. When the laborers arrived at the 3,000-foot mark, they saw the formation strata reversing to the west in huge breaks, just as the bishop had said it would. It is interesting to note here that Dr. James Talmage said there was no reversing of the strata in that mountain. From this point the workmen went back to the winds to continue that shaft. But when they had sunk the shaft at the wind some 285 feet, and discovered the iron red formation which was to mark the level of their lower tunnel, they were obliged to stop again, although they were just 40 feet from their 18-foot deposit of rich sacking ore, that could be shoveled up like sand ore, that he had compared to the fish ready for the frying pan, with no waste rock in it. Here the water came in faster than their electric pump could take it out, so they had to temporarily abandon the winds. But the bishop reassured them that when it was time to return there, an earthquake would cause a fissure to open, and the water would all drain off, and no longer be a hindrance to them. Dream Mine Story, Pierce, page 35. Then a new turn of events proved the bishop to be more inspired than many wished him to be. In January of 1929, Emily Coyle, John's wife, said that her husband declared something would happen on the hill that would bring in plenty of money. It was right after this that he went to Salt Lake City to get some funds from the secretary of the company for some needed expenses, when he was told there was no more money left in the company. He then told the secretary of the mine that he would soon have more money than he could handle. On February 28, 1929, the Spanish Fork Press announced that the operators of the local Dream Mine had struck platinum. J.W. Wharf, assayer for the company, had determined from samples 310% or more of platinum. This was confirmed by another assayer from Eureka. Immediately stock was in great demand. The stock price rose with the excitement. When this news got out, people became excited all right. They began coming to Coyle's house just as he had seen they would, holding up greenbacks in their hands, wanting to buy stock. And they came in such droves that they filled every room in the house at times. No telling how much money would have come in if Bishop Coyle hadn't put a stop to the stock selling at $1.50 a share. After that, at the request of the miners who had stock coming to them, he sold some for them at $5 a share, and then stopped that, too. Meanwhile, the offers poured in from men wanting to buy every share of his personal stock for as much as $10 a share. Although Bishop Coyle had around 20,000 shares of his own personal stock, and could have sold every share of it then, and there for $10 a share, he wouldn't sell any of it. He tried to tell them that it would blow over, that it was not the big strike that would not blow over. But no one wanted to listen to him. They wanted to buy the stock. Therefore, many of them searched elsewhere until they found a stockholder who was willing to sell for $10 a share, and there was much of it that changed hands at that price. When the excitement blew over and things calmed down again, the buyers who had purchased employee stock from Bishop Coyle at $5 a share were given as much again stock as they had purchased without cost, because Coyle did not want this to be such an expensive lesson to them. But when the next excitement comes, he told them, the people will rush to our house much more excited than ever, and they would fill the house, and the lawn, and even the road in front of the house, and on down the road, causing a traffic jam for quite some distance away. This excitement will not blow over, but it will be permanent, though the people could no longer buy stock from the company at that time. The Dream Mine Story, Pierce, page 48. The mine was then experiencing a boom much the same as the rest of the country. It was the year 1929. Early in July of that year, some visitors came to John's home, which was a small adobe house in Spanish Fork. John was renting this house from his stake president, Henry Gardner, who was also his banker. Bishop Coyle was absent on this occasion, so they interviewed Mrs. Coyle, asking her how she felt about her husband's dreams, if she thought they were true or not. Yes, John has had quite a few dreams already proved to be true, so I don't see why this one about the mine shouldn't prove to be true, also, she said. Has he had anything unusual given to him lately? Yes, he saw that a financial crash would come over the nation just 4 months from now. That was June 29. Does Mr. Gardner, your banker, know about this? Yes, the other day John went down to see Mr. Gardner and told him about it, and advised him to get as many of his loans back in as he could before October, because that was when the trouble would come. Would you mind telling us, suggested one of the visitors, if your husband has ever had one of these unusual dreams that has ever failed to prove true? I have never seen one of them fail yet, she affirmed. An interesting sequence to Bishop Coyle's informing Mr. Gardner, the banker, of the forthcoming market crash, was as follows. As the 4 months rolled by, and nothing of the sort had as yet happened, Henry Gardner hailed Bishop Coyle into his bank as he was passing by, saying that he had a bone to pick with him. He then, rather in a facetious mood, upbraided Coyle for being a false prophet. He pointed out how he had taken his advice, and had not extended some of the loans which now appeared to have been good risks. And now no sign of a market crash. What did Coyle have to say for himself now? Bishop Coyle faced up to him squarely and insisted that his prediction still stood without any changes, and that Mr. Gardner was jumping the gun on him, for he still had one more day before the 4 months were up, as it was only October 28th. He could call him back after tomorrow if he had any bone to pick with him. But this dream was true, make no mistake about that. Needless to say, the following day, October 29th, the newspapers carried big headlines about the history-making stock market crash, while Henry Gardner had good cause to marvel at his most unusual tenant. The Dream Mine Story, Pierce, pages 48 to 49. Picture, here the bishop had received many important dreams concerning the mine and also of national events. But he also received instructions from the Lord concerning his own family. One time he received instructions for a brother who learned a hard lesson, but gained new respect for the bishop. Bishop was carried in the spirit into the spirit world, where he saw beauty beyond anything he had ever seen on earth. The homes were neat, well arranged, and surrounded with gardens of flowers that defied description, rare and brilliant colors not seen on earth. As he walked up the path toward a T-shaped house, his father, who had been dead a number of years, came out on the walk and greeted him with a hearty welcome. He said, "John, I want you to go back to earth and teach the gospel to your brothers and sisters, and see that they repent and go to the temple and be sealed for time and eternity. Tell Harry if he doesn't quit his profanity and getting drunk, he will get an awful shaking up." John came back and went to work teaching and working with them, and they all were obedient, but Harry, who was stubborn and unwilling. John said to him, "I have warned you these 3 times, and if you don't straighten up, you will be punished with an awful shaking up." The warning was like pouring water on a duck. He paid no heed until one day he was going up the trail in Flat Canyon taking supplies up to his sheep camp. He was walking, leading the pack horses to the oaks, when suddenly an unseen power seized him and shook him with such fury, that when he clung to the oaks, it tore the flesh off his hands. That changed his whole life. He quit drinking and went to the temple and had his wife and children all sealed to him for eternity. Relief Mine Story, J. Young, page 4. One of the Hanks family living near Salem met the bishop one morning. Bishop asked him if he could help him for the rest of the day, but Hanks replied that he was in the middle of some work with his sheep. He just couldn't spare the time. However, if the bishop couldn't locate anyone else to help him, then he would go. The bishop asked Hanks if he was selling his sheep, to which Hanks replied that he was going to wait until fall to sell them. The bishop walked over to the gate and then stopped. He turned back to Hanks and said, "You had better sell them before fall, because if you don't, you'll be lucky to get $3 a head." The bishop opened the gate, went through, and turned back to Hanks and added, "And then you'll have to leave their bells on them." That fall, when Hanks was getting ready to sell his sheep, the market plunged. He couldn't find a buyer for them anywhere. Finally, he located someone up near Bountiful who said he would give him only $3 a head. They prepared a bill of sale, and the man was just about to put his pen to the paper, but stopped and said, "And you'll have to leave the sheep bells on." Nearly 10 years before World War I, Bishop Coyle predicted the involvement of the United States in a world war. He also predicted the involvement of the 145th Field Artillery, which was composed of Utah boys. He declared that he saw a dream that the 145th would be called to the front, but would never see action. When the war began, many remembered the prophecy that it was a fulfillment of the bishop's dream. Many of the parents of the boys who had sons in the 145th Artillery began to take comfort in the rest of the prophecy that their boys would not see action. His prediction of the war in the 145th made wide circulation, since the war was uppermost on everyone's mind, especially those who had boys in the 145th Artillery. Then one morning the newspaper headlines bore the news that the 145th Field Artillery had received orders to move up to the front lines. They would encounter an engagement with the enemy that same day. This was a blow to many of the parents who had trusted in the bishop's prediction. A man by the name of Fred Squires from Salt Lake City, an active stockholder in the mine, read the paper with shock. He was so disturbed about this prophecy failing that he went to the mine and found Bishop Coyle to show him the paper. When the bishop saw the headlines, he calmly said, "Fred, they're telling a lie. The 145th will not see action on the front lines. The war will be over by the time they reach the front lines." Fred was holding a newspaper with the date of November 11, 1918. Strangely enough, the armistice had already been signed, and it had caused the cancellation of the 145th Field Artillery from going into action. By the time Fred Squires arrived back in Salt Lake City, the news of the armistice had already been received. While compiling information for the first edition of this book, I noticed a prophecy attributed to Bishop Coyle that was recorded by Norman Pierce. Since Pierce was no longer alive for confirmation, and since I personally had never heard Bishop Coyle give such a prophecy, I decided not to include it in my book. Furthermore, I thought it sounded too fantastic and impossible to ever be fulfilled. It is important to record in this revised edition this very significant prophecy and its fulfillment. Muddy water in the streets like rivers. About this time Bishop Coyle had another of his same prophetic dreams which I heard him relate, saying, "It looks like it won't be long now before we'll be having some of the big troubles we've been expecting. I saw in a dream the other night that muddy water would flow in the streets like rivers in almost every community from one end of the state to the other. When it comes, it's going to cause a lot of trouble for a lot of people around here. It will be the beginning of really big troubles." The Dream Mine Story, Pierce, 1958, page 90. Years later, in 1983, rains began to pour over the state of Utah. They continued until water literally ran down the streets of cities from one end of the state to the other. Some small towns were literally abandoned until the water receded. Over half of the counties asked for federal emergency assistance. The Agriculture and Health Committee was told that Utah's farms and ranches have sustained an estimated $57.7 million loss. SL Tribune, Utah floods, page 62. There were $63 million in road damages in the state. The total estimate for damages from the rains and too rapidly melting snow came to over $200 million. Picture. Bishop Coyle's prophecies were becoming a thorn in the side of many of the general authorities of the LDS Church. There was a continual fulfillment of prophecies and predictions from the mine on the hill, yet a famine of such gifts existed with the leaders of the church in Salt Lake City. The gap between some of the church leaders and Bishop Coyle was growing further and further apart. Yet more and more people were receiving inspiration of their own that the mine was the work of God. One unusual testimony came from a man by the name of Parley Alton Waters. Waters said an angel came one night and gave him some very interesting information which he put into a poem, and later gave to Bishop Coyle. "I stood at the open portal of a tunnel peculiarly grand. The patience required in its digging was famed throughout the land, and one of an ancient nation stood guard at the entry there. Hallowed, though stern, was his visage. Snow white were his beard and hair. With this guide I entered the chamber, its cavernous depths to explore, and I felt as I hastened forward, as I never had felt before. For I knew here was perfect safety, and that I had nothing to fear. For those with motives untainted were protected in working here. Near a winze at the end of the tunnel stood another of a solemn mien, stern-visaged and armed with a saber, as he at the portal had been. As we passed onward and downward, each landing was guarded the same. till by curious motives prompted. I asked, Friend, what is thy name? And why dost thou and thy fellows stand guard in these workings old? Perchance, in the depths below us, there are uncounted treasures of gold. To my query he thus made answer, Son of earth, thou hast rightly said. For I and my brothers are remnants of the nation long since dead. Ages gone, when I dwelt among mortals, these mountains were teeming with wealth, and our Father was granting my people wisdom, great riches and health. But in the pride of their hearts, they forsook him and worshipped mammon alone, till their sins reached upward to heaven, and earth neath corruption did groan. 'Twas then that the spirit ceased striving, and left them in darkness once more. For every man's hand smote his neighbor, and destruction was rapid and sure. And then when iniquity ripened, the earth in convulsions did lie, and the wealth of these mountains was hidden from their evil and covetous eye. The wealth of the mountains of Ephraim, thus saith the Lord, is mine, and to all who partake of their fatness, I give by right most divine. Here, then, was preserved for a people, prepared to accomplish his will, the wealth which the Father hath hidden beneath this most notable hill. We are guarding this wealth in the workers, that corruption shall not allure the toiler who enters these caverns with motives unselfish and pure. For the Father's purpose will ripen, though derision and scoffers abound, and coming from sources unthought of, dark clouds will cover them round. I awoke from my sleep and my dreaming, and sought my companion again. But naught did I see but the mountain, and the place where my visit had been. But I knew that this wealth that was hidden from a nation now under the sod must be used as my guide had bidden, for the glorification of God. Brother Waters thought he was to open and work this mine, but he got no direction as to where and how to find it till one day, while in Spanish Fork, someone asked him to go to the annual Dream Mine meeting that was being held on the hill that day. He went gladly. When he saw the mine tunnel, he was greatly surprised and thrilled, for it was the very thing the messenger showed him in the dream. He took the poem out of his pocket, handed it to Bishop Coyle and said, Here, Bishop, this belongs to you. It's your work and mission to bring relief to the people in time of great need and trouble. Bishop Coyle gladly received the wonderful new testimony to the divinity of his great mission and work. A Relief Mine Story, J. Young, page 6. Men were receiving testimonies from God that the work of the mine was divinely inspired, yet men like Talmage declared it to be from the evil one. Men in the church declared themselves to be prophets, seers and revelators, yet they failed to produce any revelations. Bishop Coyle never made any pretense to being a prophet, yet he was able to say the Lord showed me, and then make a prophecy which was soon fulfilled in every respect. Who really was a prophet and who was being directed by the spiritual gifts of prophecy and revelation? Every man had to ask these questions and then seek the answer for himself. Heber C. Kimball prophesied. To meet the difficulties that are coming, it will be necessary for you to have a knowledge of the truth of this work for yourselves. The difficulties will be of such a character that the man or woman who does not possess this personal knowledge or witness will fall. If you have not got the testimony, live right and call upon the Lord and cease not till you obtain it. If you do not, you will not stand. Remember these sayings, for many of you will live to see them fulfilled. The time will come when no man or woman will be able to endure on borrowed light. Each will have to be guided by the light within himself. Life of Heber C. Kimball, pages 460 to 461. It requires the spirit of prophecy to recognize the voice of a prophet. The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, said Joseph Smith, and men were now learning by the Holy Ghost that John H. Coyle was inspired of the Lord. One day J. Golden Kimball received word that Bishop Coyle wanted to see him as soon as possible, so he drove right down to the mine. Coyle immediately got into the subject that was causing him considerable distress by saying, Golden, the Lord showed me in a dream that Joseph Fielding Smith is preparing a conference sermon that is against the Dream Mine and the Lord doesn't want him to deliver it. I want you to go up there and tell him not to give that sermon. Not me, replied Golden. I'm not going to put my head in the lion's mouth. Coyle grabbed Kimball by the coat collar and said, Golden, God hates a coward. He looked a little sheepish and replied, All right, Bishop, I'll tell him, but I don't have any faith that it will do any good. The bishop smiled and retorted, Don't worry, I'll take care of the faith. Kimball returned to Salt Lake City and went directly to Joseph Fielding Smith's office. Smith was at his desk, so Golden walked over and said, Brother Smith, you're not supposed to deliver that conference sermon, that's against the Dream Mine. Smith jumped up and shouted, How did you find out about that sermon? I haven't told anyone. Golden replied, Well, the Lord knows, and he told Bishop Coyle about it. When conference came, Joseph Fielding Smith delivered a sermon, but it made no mention of the Dream Mine. Carter Grant and some friends visited the Coyle home one evening. The bishop was away, so they asked his wife the following question. Would you mind telling us, suggested one of our number, if your husband has ever had one of these PLAIN dreams of which you refer, that has failed to prove out? I have never seen one yet, she declared. Statement by Carter E. Grant to James E. Talmage, September 9, 1931, page 12. Although Bishop Coyle's wife never knew of any prophecy to fail, a few people thought he had missed one particular prophecy. Statements made by the bishop would become enlarged or exaggerated by over-enthusiastic believers, or else twisted and warped by his enemies. This misconstrued information caused Bishop Coyle trouble from friends and enemies alike. One prominent story which was circulated and accredited to the bishop as a prophecy was, in reality, never given by him at all. It was to the effect that the mine would come out on August 27, 1946. What actually happened was that the bishop once said that it would be very appropriate and coincidental if the mine should come in on August 27 on the very anniversary of the appearance of the messenger who first called him to that work. By the time the bishop heard how erroneously his statement had been changed, it had spread too far to stop. Years later, some of the stockholders still thought it had been a prophecy, but the bishop never did set a date for the mine to come in. Whenever the bishop related a dream or said the Lord had revealed something to him, the manifestation was always correct, or if it was a prophecy, it always came true. Prophecies and revelations are abundant with details of the famines of the last days. Bishop Coyle also described this food shortage that had been shown to him in dreams. Grain would grow up as though it would produce a fine crop, but something caused it to shrivel up and become a valueless harvest. Famine would occur all over the world not only because of crop failures, but because of the troubles and chaos caused by the shutdown of manufacturing and transportation. At that early date, he also said words like these: "By the time we get our ore, the mining districts will be almost at a standstill. These automobiles will get larger and larger, until some of them will resemble streetcars, filled with people." Then, too, I saw the farms all over the country all being mortgaged, and as a relief to the condition, the people were coming to borrow money at a low rate of interest from the Coyle Mining Company. I also saw a large bank belonging to our company standing on a certain corner in Spanish Fork. I have since been shown the corner. Then I saw the hard times beginning to tell upon the treasury of the church, being more depleted than in many years. Then, right in the very midst of all these happenings, with things at their darkest, we began shipping ore, giving a decided relief to the situation. Grant Thomas Statement, September 9, 1931, page 10. A professor at Utah State University, Austin Fife, and his wife, heard Bishop Coyle say that Brigham Young stood right down here in Salem, and pointed up to this mountain and said, "There's enough gold and silver in that mountain to pave all the streets in Utah County." I've talked to two of the three witnesses that heard him say so. Saints of Sage and Saddle, Austin and Alta 5, 1956, page 283. Many people have received testimonies that the mine really does contain valuable ore and other treasures. A man named Erickson wrote, "It was revealed to me by the Holy Ghost that in a deep narrow gorge, in a southeasterly direction from Salt Lake, hidden records are concealed. Visions of the Latter Days, Kraut, 1983 ed. Page 129. Visitors from the other world were not uncommon to Bishop Coyle. He had met and visited with members of his family who had left this earth many years before. Also, other heavenly and holy beings had visited with him, such as Nephi, Mormon, the three Nephites, Moses, and also the prophet Joseph Smith. Such a work required special direction, and divinely inspired messengers were on hand to guide and protect it. The mission of Moses was to gather the house of Israel out from among the Gentiles. It required outstanding miracles and plagues to accomplish that feat. Even while they were captives living in bondage to the Egyptians, they had to be separated physically and socially from the Egyptians. They had to begin their own nation. Moses was their deliverer and led them out of their bondage. They had to be taken away from the slavery, the unholy practices, the traditions, financial, military and political corruptions of their captors. When they were delivered away from that power and influence, they were then in a condition favorable to receiving the word and will of the Lord. When the prophet Moses appeared to the bishop, he explained how difficult it had been for him to gather Israel and lead them in the paths of God. He also explained how this mine would someday be used to gather Israel from the nations of the earth where they are now scattered. They cannot be saved in a scattered condition, therefore, there would be one like unto Moses who would help in leading and gathering Israel from a temporal and spiritual bondage they are now in. Today Israel must be delivered from the modern bondage of the Gentiles. They must be gathered home to the land and the places the Lord has designated for them. The house of Israel is scattered among the nations of the earth, living and dying in the customs and traditions of Gentiles. They live by the laws of the land in many different nations, rather than by the laws of God. The children of Israel are marrying Gentiles, living in the society of Gentiles, and gradually forsaking the doctrines of God. They must be delivered from bondage again, or they shall die by plagues and wars. No wonder Moses came to Bishop Coyle to explain the work of gathering Israel. It will take wealth and power, not only to bring them back from so many nations, but to support and sustain them when they arrive. Bishop Coyle was told that when this mine brings forth its riches, it will have such power and influence with the children of Israel, that more of them will come into the fold of Christ, than has been accomplished by all the missionaries that have ever traveled the earth since the restoration of the gospel. It is no wonder that Bishop Coyle and his work were so highly esteemed by the Lord. Many spiritual men learned that John Coyle was a true prophet, seer and revelator. Photo of the grove. The place where Bishop Coyle made so many famous prophecies.